What a story this is. The Lord of the Rings trilogy, written by J.R.R. Tolkien and published for the first time some 50 years ago. And now, New Zealand director Peter Jackson has brought the 3 books to life on the big screen. The Fellowship of the Ring, The Two Towers and The Return of the King were all shot right here in New Zealand. The world has now seen Tolkien's mythical Middle-earth through the cinematography of Peter Jackson. But over the next hour, we take a journey through the real Middle-earth and visit New Zealanders who worked behind the scenes to help make this the movie phenomenon. December 1, 2003, Wellington, New Zealand. The premiere of the 3rd movie in the Lord of the Rings trilogy, The Return of the King.
Peter Jackson is one of the very, very great directors living.
You did a wonderful job. Thank you so much. Well, a few steps back, away from the movie stars and the lights, camera, action, was an army of New Zealanders. And like the hordes of Mordor, they were deftly choreographed by director Peter Jackson, another New Zealander.
Action! The beacons of Minas Tirith!
Good. Was a goodie.
We managed to find just about everything that was described in the book reasonably well in New Zealand.
Hobbiton seemed to capture the quintessential medieval English village. How did you find the location?
Well, Hobbiton was one of the more difficult locations to find because the Shire, which is the county, it's very English. It's, clearly a little part of England. And, that was actually, out of all the locations in Lord of the Rings, the most difficult because we were focused very much on finding that gentle rolling countryside, lots of trees.
Peter found his Hobbiton in New Zealand's North Island on a lush, undulating farm near a tiny town called Matamata. When the big movie came to town, the small community got right into the spirit of things, even adopting the name Hobbiton. You could even buy Hobbiton burgers, no doubt for that second breakfast that hobbits love. The movie set is now a must-see on the Lord of the Rings locations trail. But the Hobbit village is just part of this farm experience. Visitors can sample livestock management, cafe hospitality, and take a pit stop, Hobbit style, of course. The farm itself is owned by the Alexander family, Dad Ian and sons Dean and Russell.
The idea of looking around Matamata came from Fran Walsh because she remembered reading The Lord of the Rings when she was about 10 or 12 years old, and then her parents took her on a drive up through New Zealand, and she actually remembers driving through thinking, wow, this is just like the Shire. Dave Comer, our location scout, I believe, did a sort of a recce around the area in a helicopter, and he spotted this section of farm which he thought would be really quite attractive. It had a lake that was already established there, and it had nice hills. There was a big tree where we were looking for this big party tree, and Dave landed the helicopter and knocked on the farmer's door.
This chap arrived, brought him to the back door, and he said he wanted to go and take some films of this particular site. I said, fine, away you go. He came back after dark that night, and he said, well, it's very, very interesting. He said he'd get them developed, and in about 6 weeks he possibly would let us know whether there was anything more to come of it.
Well, Ian's farm was just right, and the production team did come back and brought the big guns, the army.
They came in convoy with diggers, payloaders, trucks. We'd kept it secret till that stage. But by midnight that night, with the army boys staying in the local pub, I think it soon got out, and the phone the next morning was going, well, you've got the Lord of the Rings coming here. So I think by 10 o'clock, I think we had a whole convoy of media personnel arrive, and the security guards arrived as well to make sure things were kept in check. Yeah, and down below me, behind us, is where the party tree is, and that's actually where Hobbiton is, down in that area. That big, round, symmetrical tree is one of the reasons they chose this farm. And about 10 years ago, might have been 15 years ago, there was a discussion within the family that we might chop that down because it was on a main stock access and it was in the way. Well, thank goodness we didn't, because it's probably one of the more famous trees in the world now.
In big movies like these, there are lots of extras people use to fill in the background and populate the scenes. And in Hobbiton here, there were plenty of them. The job of recruiting these budding actors belonged to Miranda Rivers.
We tried to do some statistics back at the end of main production, and I think there are around 20,000 extra roles where we'd used approximately 3,000 to 4,000 people. So we sort of recycled them. You know, someone might play a Gondorian, but also a Rohan, but also an Urukai. Yeah.
How do you cast an orc as opposed to a hobbit or an elf?
Well, there's very specific differences between each of the characters. I guess for hobbits, we look for particularly, we actually came up with our own generic term. It's a new word in the English language. It's called roundy. You have to have roundy cheeks and roundy eyes. So people were rosy-cheeked and friendly and warm to look at, I guess. We found that when we put the groups of people that we'd actually cast together in a room, they took on certain personality types. And funnily enough, hobbits, for example, if you put 100 hobbits in a room, believe me, non-stop talking, you can't get a word in. You try giving them direction, it's like, it's gorgeous people.
Even some of the suitably chatty locals were cast as hobbit extras. Retired couple Jim and Jean, Dave, the rural bank manager, and homekeeper Marcia.
Our personalities came out in our costumes. Really, if we did try to ham act, it was horribly hamish, and we probably cut all those bits out where we were deliberately trying to.
And they were just homely, happy, friendly.
Yeah.
Hairy,
dirty. They were dirty. They were always putting dirt and mud on us. Yeah.
And gluing our feet back on.
Oh yeah, you had to have your feet glued on, your ears glued on.
When I first saw Hobbiton, children must see this.
Yeah.
But I think it was the child.
All these hobbit holes had chimneys and smoke coming out.
That's right.
Yes.
There was chimneys. They had a little.
And if the wind blew and the smoke went the wrong way, you had to wait until the smoke
went the right way.
We carried ladders around, pushed beer barrels around, and climbed ladders.
And did various hobbit jobs, like weeding the garden was one of mine. The one weed I pulled out, I had to put it back in again because they wanted to do it about 6 times. I put it back in, and then I took it back out again, and the poor old weed was looking horribly sick by the time it had been pulled in and taken out about 20 times.
Attention to detail was just amazing. You know, they had people running around with scissors cutting grass. You know,
I had a neighbour like that once, Dave. Jim, I believe you had an interesting little conversation with Peter Jackson himself.
It was my first day on the set, and I suppose I'd heard of Peter Jackson, but it really didn't ring a hang of a big bell. And I was pulling this weed in and out and sticking it back on the ground and so forth. And anyway, for some reason or other, I had some bright idea. I said to this hairy-looking chap, I said, Peter, I knew he was called Peter because I'd heard him being called Peter, how would it be if I did so-and-so and so-and-so? And there's dead silence from everybody else. And he sort of nodded at me and said, yeah, good idea, do it.
You could say now that you're movie stars. People recognise you as such?
not really. No.
Unfortunately, or probably fortunately, no. We'd get a bit swollen headed, wouldn't we? Yeah.
It's always better when you're making a film to be as based as close to home as you can for all sorts of logistical reasons and with the support and the backup that you have. So if there was any possibility of us finding locations within Wellington sort of driving distance, we'd try and do that. But of course, you know, it wasn't possible for a huge amount of the film.
But it was possible sometimes. Just up the road from Peter's office is Dry Creek Quarry. This uninspiring location was transformed into one of the most famous scenes in the Two Towers. Using hundreds of Miranda's extras, shooting took place over weeks of wet, cold nights. The skill of the artists and technicians employed by Peter turned this grey old quarry into one of the most spectacular scenes of the second movie, the Battle of Helm's Deep.
What are we waiting for?
This was a movie where not one single thing could be rented. The furniture had to be made. It was almost like researching history. You work it through so you end up figuring out what the design of their chair would be like based on who they are. I mean, it was just, you know, it was craftsmanship. It was a lot of thinking about the cultural significance of how that would impact on the design of their knives, their forks, their glasses, their door handles, the buckles on their belts, everything had to be built.
But thankfully, Peter found people who could build most things right on his doorstep. Now this is Petone, a suburb of Wellington, and it was right here that the material for the magical Hobbit cloaks was produced. Now those cloaks were produced from wool, not just ordinary wool, but wool produced from these rare Stansborough Gotland sheep. And the Gotland sheep farmer is Cheryl Eldridge. Cheryl, Gotland sheep, where are they from originally?
They're originally from Sweden, but we've spent the last 10 years developing them for a fibre breed because they're bred for pelts in the Northern Hemisphere. So we've concentrated on the wool type for a specific worsted fabric.
How did you make the connection with the Lord of the Rings? How did that start?
We actually had samples in New York, and the scouts for Lord of the Rings happened to see it. So it was rather, as I say, rather ironic that it had to go all the way to New York to be discovered when it's 15 minutes down the road.
What is it about the rare Gotland sheep that makes the wool so suitable for Lord of the Rings?
Because Tolkien's description of his grey fabric was quite specific in that it had to catch the natural light and give them some camouflaging qualities, and the natural grey does pick up the light and give it the qualities that I think he described in his book.
As a result of your involvement with Lord of the Rings, what have the, excuse the turn of phrase, spin-offs been? Have you got busier?
Yes, we have. But yeah, I think because of Peter's attention to detail in the movie, it's given us some sort of credibility.
While Cheryl looks after the sheep, husband Barry is in charge of the looms. And what a challenge that is when you're working with antique machinery.
Well, these looms were actually invented in the 1890s, believe it or not. So quite a long time ago. The technology is brilliant. Well, Industrial Revolution Mark I, really, and it's enabled us to do what was wanted, Middle-earth style. We get the wool washed commercially and then spun up into yarn to suit our specifications. It then gets put onto this warping mill in 100mm blocks to whatever width we need. It gets taken off onto a beam at the back and then taken over to our looms. It then has to be tied on by hand, individual knot at a time, 1,400 threads. The whole process probably takes 2 days from low to go.
So other than the spinning onto the cones or the yarn side of it, you do the whole operation from shearing the sheep right through to producing the fabric?
Yep, right, and marketing it around the world.
Did you begin that operation here?
We started in our home, and our homestead at our farm has a full-size billiard table where 1,000 metres of fabric was actually all mended, because after you've woven the fabric, there are knots and things you have to remove. So it was a very handy billiard table. Didn't get to play much billiards.
Very much that Kiwi thing, isn't it?
Oh, yes, yeah. No, it was part of the fun, just making it work as it went along.
Rich diversity summarises the New Zealand landscape. The topography ranges from semi-tropical forest in the north to jagged, craggy mountains in the south. In the middle of it all, one of New Zealand's unique national parks. It's hard to imagine that such a beautiful part of New Zealand, Mount Ruapehu and the Whakapapa ski slopes, could become a place of such darkness and terror. Mordor, just over there, Mount Doom.
In all cases, we did what we could to leave no trace of ourselves. We took the approach that we wanted to basically walk away, clean it up, and no one would ever know that a film crew had been there. And that indeed is one of the very strict requirements of the national park. And I was surprised at how regulated it was. But I'm pleased. I mean, as a New Zealander, I'm very happy that our national parks are being protected in this way. But, we... Filming on Ruapehu, there was mosses that they didn't want us to walk on, so we had to lay carpet down over the rocks, and the entire crew had to work on the side of Ruapehu within this carpeted area. It was most bizarre actually seeing the metres and metres of carpet all just sort of down the side of the mountain. It was kind of shag pile. It was sort of strange.
Well, the man charged with carpeting the mountainside was Scotty Barry. So how much carpet did you have to lay here?
We had about 10,000 square metres.
That's a lot of carpet. That's a lot of carpet. Where did it come from? Did you contact everybody, carpet suppliers around the place?
All the second-hand dealers and all the second-hand carpet places between here and Wellington, I think, where they had to go and find it all. But it worked. And they've set the benchmark, Jim, for future large movies in this area, which were a little bit apprehensive prior to this movie coming in here. The work they did was just phenomenal. Really good for the film industry for the future.
Examples of some of the flora that you were protecting?
Just over here, Jim, we've got some, and we'll come up and get a better, closer look at it. We've got the mountain Inaka here, and of course the sturdy mountain daisy, but the main one we were trying to protect was this one. And believe it or not, it's called vegetable sheep. And if you open it up a little, you can see it just looks like a fleece. But it's very sensitive. It can take downward pressure, but it can't take the walking because it opens it up and
Scuffs it.
That's dead right, scuffs it out. So we had to come up with an idea of how to protect it, and the carpet just did a wonderful job.
Over 3,000 extras were used in the making of The Lord of the Rings, and we're better to recruit some of those used in the battle scenes than the New Zealand Army.
Unfortunately, when we did the fight scenes, I think the stunt guys had a pretty hard day the first day on with the Army. They ended up quite battered and bruised because the Army are trained to fight, and what they haven't learnt yet is the art of make-believe. So I'm afraid a lot of our weapons got used quite harshly that day.
3 of those Army boys who went to battle on Mount Ruapehu were Corporal Tim Hape, Trooper Greg Marsden, and Corporal Jason Te Are. What parts did you play?
I played an orc.
Oh, I was just an orc as well, yeah.
Yeah, and I was an orc killer. I was a Gondorian.
The fighting part itself, was there any holding back, or how'd you get on there?
They spent a bit of money on the props, you know, especially with the aggression that we have in the Army, where they sort of train you to be a little bit aggressive. The film crew actually wanted us, you know, to sort of like play it nice and soft sort of thing. But, you know, when you're in there, the adrenaline takes over, you just start whacking anything. So 9 times out of 10, it was the props that were given in, so we have to go down there and see the girls for some more props, and yeah, they weren't too happy with us.
When you enlisted, you didn't have any aspirations of becoming Hollywood figures, obviously.
Oh, no.
Well, not at the time, but we're thinking about it now, eh?
See you soon, boys. The get stuck in Kiwi spirit was very prevalent in the making of these movies, a good example being the involvement of the New Zealand Army. But what really amazed the production team was the broad skill base of the local people who stepped up to help make the movies the wonderful success they've become.
Saruman attacks from Isengard. Sauron from Mordor.
Well, those maps and scrolls and superbly illustrated book of Bilbo Baggins were all crafted by a man who lives here, Daniel Reeve. What a career change this was. 5 years ago, Daniel was a bank computer operator, but when the Tolkien fan and part-time calligrapher heard about the Lord of the Rings project, he put quill to paper and fired the samples through to Peter's office. The rest, as they say, is history.
They phoned back just in 5 minutes sort of thing, and yes, we need some of this sort of stuff, come along. And I shot in there and went out that afternoon with my first commission for the film, of writing the fireworks for Gandalf's cart, the little inscriptions, and it just sort of snowballed, got bigger and bigger. There's Bilbo's journals and bits and pieces in the background everywhere.
Where did you create all this stuff?
Just here, kitchen table. You know how it's done. Just clear off the dinner dishes and do a bit of map work. Yeah, it's all just ink and watercolour and the real McCoy, nothing digital about it.
How did you get this uniquely Middle-earth look?
Loads and loads of watercolour paint, splattered at it, dribbled at it, tilting it, running it, throwing it around the place and just soaking up the colour of the watercolour, and then wait till the morning and when it dries out and see what it looks like, and then add some more if it needs it.
Tell me about the quills. Is that just a prop, or did you actually use those? And how do you make the things work?
I had to use these things because the paper that we used, they went to great expense and got fancy paper, but a normal pen just is hopeless on it. It sucks all the ink out and it's just a scratchy, messy thing. So I figured out ways to get the quills to work, and it was the only way to get ink onto paper like this. And so lots of things in the movie were done with the quills, the maps, 30 pages of Bilbo's journal. They were all written with a quill.
You had to teach the stars to use it because it was all part of the story.
That was fun. I had to teach Ian Holm how to use his quill, and Elijah. They're back again.
There and back again. A Hobbit's Tale by Bilbo Baggins. This is wonderful.
Are you going to keep those quills going, or are you going to go back to the bank?
the bank is a past life. The emails keep coming in and the phone keeps ringing, and no, that's it. The professional calligrapher now and cartographer.
Well, New Zealanders have a great do-it-yourself ability, and I think we also have a certain amount of a reckless abandon, I guess you'd say, because, you know, on the face of it saying, well, Lord of the Rings, you know, 3 movies, in anybody's books that would be a fairly daunting prospect, and in a sense, I think our advantage was the fact we'd never done it before, that we didn't know how difficult it was going to be, and as the difficulties arose, we figured out ways to solve the problems, and so it was kind of our naivety combined with our do-it-yourself approach. Don't worry about what everyone else does. Let's just figure out the best way to do it. You know, that kind of combined to actually make it possible. I think there's a lot of film industries in the world that would have actually struggled just to put it into the established infrastructure that they'd be used to.
It has come to me, the One Ring. It shall be an heirloom of my kingdom. All those who follow in my bloodline shall be bound to its fate, for I will risk no hurt to the ring. It is precious to me.
This is the city of Nelson, nestled between mountain ranges at the top of the South Island. Geographically, it's right in the centre of New Zealand, the middle of Middle Earth, you might say. It was here that something small but powerful was crafted, something exquisitely precious to the lifeblood of the trilogy.
My precious.
The wonderful jewellers who made the ring, who had to forge this ring, and it was one of the most famous props that we were ever going to use was this ring, and we spent a long time designing that, and we went through a lot of prototyping and of getting the shape right, getting the diameter, the thickness, the amount of curvature on the exterior of the ring.
The One Ring, made right here. Nelson jeweller Jens Hansen was approached to make the prototype ring. Sadly, Jens passed away before filming even began, so his son Thorkild took over the project. Why do you think they came here and chose you?
Yeah, his reputation for, being a sort of a craft artist, contemporary jeweller for the last 30 years, and having the standing that he, did have, was enough for them.
There was more than one ring made.
I guess that's film for you, isn't it? For the shot, you have to have the right ring, and if the ring is to go onto somebody's finger, it has to be the right size. So they had to make the ring for each person. Then you had to make more than one. One for the actual shot, one in case it got lost, and one just for backup. So, yeah. So there's quite a few of them. But, yeah, there's still only the one original prototype.
That's still firmly here?
Yeah.
The effects on the business, they've obviously been pretty positive.
Yeah, it has been really good for us because it's expanded us outside of Nelson. I never realised that it was going to be a good thing for us at first, but a friend of mine who's in media was, we were having a drink up at home, and he said, what are you guys doing at the moment? And I said, making these bloody rings for this, And he just sort of jaw dropped. What do you mean? I said, we're making the Lord of the Rings ring. And the next thing, he was up the next morning with radios and we're going to do this, and this is huge. And I realised quite quickly then that, wow, this is going to be quite big. We get emails from people in Hong Kong, Singapore, America, Canada, Spain, even Yugoslavia.
A few kilometres south of Nelson is the small town of Richmond. And in that small town is a small brewery that made a very special beer for small people.
What's that? This, my friend, is a pint. It comes in pints. Oh, I can get you one.
Well, the man who made those pints was brewer Craig Harrington. Why do they want your beer on Lord of the Rings?
Well, I think, number one, that we're a New Zealand-owned independent brewery. I think they were recommended to come here, and I'm pleased to have been able to do it. They were looking for a dark ale with a good head on it and low alcohol, obviously, for the filming side of it. You had to, there'd be a few takes involved, so, yeah, we didn't want the alcohol kicking in.
You didn't want too many drunk hobbits rolling around the place, huh?
No, definitely not. There's enough around here.
Tourists come in here and say, I want to drink some of that Hobbit-type beer.
It is available on tap. draft form, but I'm working on a label at the moment.
What are you calling it?
Sobering Thought.
Sobering Thought?
Yeah.
A Hobbit beer?
Yeah.
Yeah, 1%.
1%. It's a sobering thought.
What's the Lord of the Rings done for your business?
It's been huge, really. The tourism side has just opened up. We've never had tourism in our business. It's been massive. I've had to scramble and get things together, and hats, shirts, caps, glassware, bits and pieces like that we never had, we had to go and do. And the tourists haven't stopped coming, really.
Now, drinking was one thing, eating was another. More than 500 kilometres south of here, a man supplied 5,000 eggs for the cast and the crew. All the eggs you'd ever want in central Otago, Middle-earth.
Yeah.
All across New Zealand, we helped to make the Lord of the Rings. Nestled on the shores of Lake Wakatupi on New Zealand's South Island is the country's adventure capital, Queenstown. Here you'll find the Caterers to the Stars, the Flying Trestles Company. Whether high on a mountain or deep in a valley, these guys met every logistical challenge to feed cast and crew. The boss is Colin Sutherland. So, Colin, what about the dietary preferences of some of the people in The Lord of the Rings? Gimli, for example.
Every morning at about 10 o'clock, because he had to stay really bulked up, we'd cook him at least one steak and probably two. So, you know, he was definitely on maximum protein. Frodo and Sam, they always wanted blueberry pancakes, so we did that each day for them. Yeah, they were really low maintenance. You know, they just enjoyed having good, fresh New Zealand food and loved the seafood and, you know, the lamb and a bit of venison now and then. Yeah.
So, excuse the pun, the feedback was pretty good from the stars.
Yeah, they certainly, they enjoyed it, yeah.
What about some of those orcs and those mean-looking army boys?
Well, that's why we went through so many eggs. Yeah, those boys, it was awesome the amount of food they got through. They would easily eat 4 eggs at a sitting. That's, you know, fried or poached, and then they'd have some scrambled on the way past.
If we take somewhere like the Palinor Fields, 700 or 800 people, give us an idea of the quantities of food involved.
Well, this pallet of eggs would be going through 2 of those a week.
So how many eggs in here, roughly?
Oh, it's about 3,000 in here.
So you double that for the week?
Yeah, it would be 6,000 to 8,000 a week would be going through. And the one you're leaning up against those potatoes, that's enough for 2.5, 3 days worth.
How many we got?
There's about 700 kilos there, and that's, it's probably 2.5 days worth.
So that's 3/4 of a ton?
Yeah, well, they're big boys, big spud eaters. Yeah, we're feeding 300 horsemen at night as well, so we were going through a lot of food there.
To the west of Queenstown is an exquisitely preserved village from New Zealand's colourful frontier days. 100 years ago, Arrowtown was booming after gold was found in the river. In the gold rush that followed, prospectors came from far and wide, even from China. As a result, a large Chinese community of gold panners grew up on the riverbanks, and the buildings remain to this day. The Chinese have long gone, along with the gold, but Peter Jackson found the river an ideal setting for a dramatic scene from The Fellowship of the Ring. Trevor Copeland and Dion Church are shepherds in the South Island High Country, where horses are the traditional way to get around. Riding's in the blood. In the movies, it was royal blood as they rode in the King's Army with 300 other top New Zealand horsemen. This horse, and of course Dion's horse, pretty famous now, aren't they? What scenes was this fella in?
We did that big battle scene up at Twizel.
Palinor Field.
Yeah, we got to run over all the orcs and beat the living daylights out of them, and it was all good.
Now, you had a fairly prominent part there, right? You sort of half-by led the charge?
Yeah, got to carry the King's flag into the actual battle part of it, which was, mate, it was all good.
And alongside where you were galloping, there was a truck with a camera, right, doing a tracking shot?
Yeah, they had a big tar seal road right along beside us, and they had anywhere from sort of 6 to 10 cameras on it. And we just sort of galloped alongside the car and yahoo and scream and yell and try and make it look like we're going to kill someone. And yeah, it was fantastic.
One of the highlights of your life?
Oh, mate, it was great, yep.
Same for you, Dion? How did the big call come for the Lord of the Rings movies?
For a start, I auditioned when they were looking for extras, Jim, and they just called me up one day and said that they were into it.
You were the man for the job?
A good job for me, yeah.
Don't call me, I'll call you.
They'd be sitting on a horse all day and riding around, yeah.
Did you meet Peter Jackson?
Yeah, mate, he was fantastic, eh? What you see on TV with him at those awards and stuff, wandering around in his shorts and jandals, mate, that's him. He was so good. He'd wander out amongst everybody in the thing, and he treated everybody the same. Didn't matter who you were or what you're doing, he had the same approach to everybody, and he was just fantastic, eh? He's just top man, just brilliant.
Many occasions in the South Island, we ran out of men. One time when we were trying to film down south, it was the lambing season. You know, hello, real world. It came into effect again. And a lot of the guys who we'd originally auditioned were unavailable. There was nothing we could do. So we called up the women. These were horse riders, actually. We called up the women and we put on blonde beards and they became our female Rohans for the day.
Heliworks is an air charter company based at Queenstown Airport. Pilot Alfie Spate played a key role as Peter Jackson captured stunning aerial shots on film.
We must hold this course west of the Misty Mountains for 40 days. If our luck holds, the Gap of Rowan will still be open to us.
The most wonderful byproduct for me was getting to go up with, Alfie in a helicopter and fly around day after day after day, 7 or 8 hours of flying each day, just looking in every nook and cranny. I think the producers despaired a little bit because, of course, the places I liked the best were the ones that had no roads and had no access. That's a significant part of the logistics of filmmaking is if you're going to be filming somewhere, you ideally need to get a generator truck to that location. You need to think of the catering, how you're going to feed everybody. Where's everyone going to change? Where are they going to go to the toilet? I mean, it's kind of everything has to be thought of. And for me to just sort of point to a mountaintop and say, I think we should just shoot there. I think everyone was tearing their hair out. But we managed to make it work and we had great logistical backup from all the chopper pilots.
We'd have about six helicopters some days, all carrying people, cast and crews, sling loads of gear.
It was sort of like a scene from Apocalypse Now, it was like them all...
And we even took Gimli's chair into a location one day.
John Rhys Davies, who plays Gimli, had to wear this heavy kind of costume, very, very heavy, with metal and armour and chainmail, and he couldn't sit down in a normal chair because it would break, so we had this big lounge chair, not too dissimilar to what I'm sitting in now, and we had to get that up the mountain, so this helicopter came flying in with a big rope, and John Rhys Davies' armchair was sort of swinging from the bottom of the helicopter. I mean, it's a shame that he couldn't actually sit in the chair, and it would have saved an extra trip, but anyway, that came flying in, and I thought, this is pretty bizarre to be on the mountain in the South Island and seeing an armchair being sort of choppered in.
Been a good experience, Alfie?
Wonderful experience, and one will never forget that. And this movie's going to be around for a long time. And
this area of New Zealand is called Paradise, and it's easy to see why. It was here the spectacular aerial sequence of Gandalf arriving at Isengard was filmed. But all is not what it appears to be in those scenes. Ian Brodie is the author of one of New Zealand's best-selling books, the Lord of the Rings Location Guidebook. A Tolkien aficionado, Ian's privy to a few secrets about how Peter Jackson shot the movies.
The great thing about Isengard is when you read it in Lord of the Rings, Tolkien described it so vividly. Mountain backdrop, certain things here and there. This is exactly as it was described in the book, but the Isengard that you see in Lord of the Rings is actually almost 3 different places. All these mountains. And then, of course, the model of Isengard was made at Weta Studios in Miramar. The other part of it was filmed at Harcourt Park in Wellington, 600 k's away. So it's a whole bunch of Kiwis doing different things, but the end result is Isengard exactly as Tolkien described it. So, of course, Gandalf arrives at Isengard to tell Saruman that he's found the One Ring. So they're nicely and quietly walking around through these gardens as Gandalf says, "I found the ring, Saruman, what should we do with it?"
You are sure of this?
Beyond any doubt. So this is Mount Victoria, right in the centre of Wellington. But there's a great scene here, of course. The hobbits are being chased by the Black Rider. They're zigzagging down through this path in the middle of the night. There's fog all around.
What about that wonderful scene where Frodo and the hobbits were hiding underneath the matted roots of the tree? Where was that?
Yeah, that's just straight over there.
It surprises people. I think the very first day of location shooting we ever did was in Mount Victoria, which is right in the heart of the city. You're literally, trying not to see the buildings through the trees because the woods are not very thick.
And of course you might recognise right behind us here, get off the road, where Frodo's being chased by the Black Riders. He hears, he knows he shouldn't be on the road. All the leaves are shimmering around here, and that's him standing right in the middle.
Get off the road!
So this is what it must have felt like.
Black Riders, of course, are coming along here, the hobbits underneath. They know something bad is up top.
Question. The roots, where are they?
All made of plastic, of course, by Weta Studios right here in Wellington. Just straight down the road here.
The trilogy's enormous popularity has brought increasing numbers of fans to New Zealand who go in search of the movie locations, armed with the guidebook, of course. Some are even lucky enough to get a personal tour from Ian himself. In fact, people in the industry have labelled him the movie's ambassador. Nomad Safari's four-wheel drive tours have tapped into the insatiable tourist demand for sites and locations in deepest Middle-earth. Adding spice to the adventure commentary, some of the safari guides relate how they were actually in the movies themselves, including the boss, David Gatwood Ferguson.
I was one of the really horrible fighting Uruk-hai. I was filming close to here, and we were marching from Saruman's lair, Isengard, to Helm's Deep. So we all got dressed up, and I was one of the big pike bearers, and we had to march through the tussock and everything. And it was one of these typical Central Otago days when it's way into the 30s, and we had 6 inches of rubber, and we were cooking by 8 o'clock, and we practice, and then we had to march up this hill through smoke. And it was just, we started with about 70 of us, and you couldn't see in these outfits, so as we were marching up, people would be tripping over, and you just have to march on top of them, and you're cooking. It was incredible. But one of the official books of the movie has actually got that scene I was in, so I can sort of say that was me.
Tour guides Dean, Michael, Tony and Lyndon also did a tour of duty in the movies, cast as orcs.
These guys have come halfway around the world. They didn't have a chance to be there themselves, so just to meet anyone who had anything to do with the movies is a big thrill for them.
And basically I went to the same casting these guys, and then you go in and get measured, and then I was called to do a second audition. And then you had to do the little scene that you were taught, and I got pulled aside, and I ended up playing 3 different characters. I played a Uruk-hai, a Haradrim, and a Gondorian Ranger.
Tony, you were obviously an orc, mate.
Yeah, I was an orc. Yeah, they laid me out on the beach. I had to lay there, pretend I was dead. The guy that played Irma come up and poked me in the belly, and by that time, it's such a hot day, he'd had a lot of food. I'd fallen asleep, he poked me in the belly, and I went, oh, and he went, oh. Yeah, a bit of one of those classic moments.
But there was one guy in this group, I'm told, who had a slightly unusual walk. Is that you, Lyndon? What do they nickname you, mate?
The gay orc.
Did they?
Oh, it doesn't really matter, eh? You know, watching the movie, you just have to watch Liv Tyler, and it reminds me which side I bat for.
And here we see our tour guides in action, including Lyndon's dainty descent down the steps. An hour's drive deeper into Middle-earth, those orc safari drivers got us to the remote Skipper's Canyon. It was here that Ian shared even more location secrets.
You instantly recognise this, don't you? It's the Fort of Brunnen, where Frodo's been stabbed in the arm by the Black Rider, and he's brought to the river. The Black Riders are in hot pursuit. They come down this path here, and Elrond can control the water. So Arwen knows if she can get across there, he'll let go the flood. And of course in the film there's that fantastic part where you see the flood coming round the corner and Frodo's saved.
They stood on that very little beach there on the corner?
They rode down on this track just over here and stood on this right on the side. And that's a mission in itself, actually, just getting the horses in here. it's a pretty remote spot.
There are many ways to reach the real Middle-earth locations. The horsepower-charged thrill of a jet boat ride is one of them. Dart River Safaris operate this jet boat, and here's another safari driver involved in the movies. Dwayne.
I took all the extras in and out of the lunch sites, basically all the orcs, all the extras dressed in rubber suits. So to walk any distance from anywhere out over in the trees there, from the lunch spot to the filming site, they couldn't really walk too far, so I carted them backwards and forwards in the buses and the stars when they need to go back up and down.
In your opinion, what sort of impact has the trilogy made on local business down here?
Oh, I think probably doubled at least so far. Yeah, right from the start when they were just up here setting up, they employed a lot of local people during the winter, which we never used to get.
Are there any environmental problems or anything that the locals were not happy with?
The only thing they left behind were tyre tracks and a good name, really.
For all of us, this has been 4 years of our life now. It's not just... We've all done many films and lots of small projects, whereas this was an entire life experience. It was unlike anything that had been done before.
And I hope that what we've done is to at least send a strong message out there that New Zealanders can, you know, do Lord of the Rings. I mean, it is arguably the most complicated film production that anyone's done ever. And it was done by Kiwis, and so it's put in a pretty good place now to be able to hopefully build on that.
Critics are calling the Lord of the Rings movies among the greatest of all time. Masterpieces by a New Zealand director who's now become one of the world's leading movie makers. And yet, of all the places on the planet, Peter Jackson chose his own country and thousands of his own countrymen to help make these movies. And that loyalty gave New Zealanders a sense of ownership and inspired the passion and the creativity and lots of hard work. Just as the little hobbits helped restore Middle-earth, the little guys in New Zealand, ordinary Kiwis, helped produce the success of the Rings trilogy from within the scenic magnificence of their own backyard. The real Middle-earth.